Okay, here we go. We're ready to do another one of these painting classes. I sure am, everybody. Okay. Still getting used to that 21. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to be making another painting by an artist who I love dearly. And I'm not the only one to say that. It's pretty easy to say that you love this artist, because this artist is probably the most influential Japanese person to ever live. And I don't just say that out of nowhere. That is my personal belief. And I'm sure there's probably other people from Japan who say, oh no, here's this person, this filmmaker, this political figure, this military figure, this musician, etc. are more influential. But just speaking from my understanding of the world, so this is my personal belief, but I did a little bit of research and found that I'm not the only one to believe this. We'll get into exactly why he had such a profound effect on the world in a moment here. But I think this artist, Katsushika Hokusai, most of the time people just call him by Hokusai, his last name. So Hokusai, I would argue, is probably the closest example that I can think of to a visual artist who is like a genius. You know, one of those persons that you just think, this is like a god walking among people. We're going to look at a little bit of his art here in a moment, but especially when we start talking about his technique and how he did what he did, it boggles my mind. I've been thinking about him all day long today, and the more and more I look at his work, the more and more I find myself profoundly dumbfounded by his ability. So let me see. I'm going to bring up a couple of things that I want to point out right off the top here. As always, I like to kind of point out that there's a Facebook group that my wife created on my behalf, because she's far more intelligent and savvy about all these things. Oops, we're going to look at that in a moment. But this Facebook group is a private Facebook group for people that are taking or have taken the classes that I teach here on YouTube, my drawing and painting classes. And it is slowly growing week by week, because we're not letting everybody in. If people haven't taken the classes, we try to want to limit those people, because we don't want people selling you hot dogs or sweaters or all sorts of random stuff. But it is just, every time I open this up and my wife is looking at it and she's like, oh my God, you got to check this out. All the stuff people are uploading. And, you know, here's just another thing here. Here's a painting by Deborah, one of our longtime viewers and participants, who's done a little mashup of, I think, 3 paintings. We have the Henri Matisse goldfish, still life with goldfish. We have the Suzanne Valadon, the cat. And then we have Giorgio Morandi here, the little bottles in the corner. So, and I think she had a whole kind of story about, it looks like that Valadon's cat photobombed my Matisse goldfish painting, and wouldn't you know it, Morandi left his jugs and bottles hanging around. I think that's super cool. I love the idea of, once you start understanding how acrylic paint works and a little bit about how to paint the paintings we've made so far, then you can really start having fun and playing with the different styles and techniques, mashing them together like that. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The link for that is, I think it's the very first thing in the video description below. I want to also point out the Dropbox, and there's a link to that in the video description below. And you'll see in here, there are folders for every video we've created so far, and in all but a few of them, I've now uploaded outline drawings, including today's drawing. So if you click on Hokusai today, you will see the original. So this is basically what you'll see in here. You'll see the original painting that we're about to paint, and then a traced version that I've traced on my iPad using Procreate. And then you can print that out onto paper. And we're going to, I'm going to transfer this onto the canvas today. It's and then I'm going to do something also a little bit different. I'm going to show you how to collage this onto a canvas using Mod Podge, or Mod Podge. I always say Mod Podge for whatever reason. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit about how to do that, but if you want to know where those files are and how you get them, then look at the Dropbox below. And I've also gone back and done outlines for all but a couple of them. I still have a few to do for all the other previous 36 videos and the ones upcoming shortly here. So we'll go right to talking briefly about who Hokusai was and a little bit about his impact in the world. We're going to take a look at some of his artwork. So, Katsushika Hokusai was born in 1760 and lived till 1849. So lived a long life. He was, 88 years old by the time he passed away. He was successful while he was alive. Subsequently became way more successful after he died, which is not unusual for artists, unfortunately. He's primarily a printmaker and drawer, and rather than a painter necessarily. He did do some paintings, but I think primarily he's known as a printmaker. And today we're not going to be making a print. I'm not going to show you how to do woodblock prints, which is how he made this particular artwork. There is, let me see, I don't want this to play, but let me see if I can, this is a really great video here. I'm just going to see if I can get a still of it. So, Hokusai made the image, and most of the images he's most famous for, by carving into a flat block of wood. And when we look at the drawing again, to think about that this is from a block of wood that he carved out to leave those black lines, which he subsequently made prints from, your mind just sort of explodes a little bit. So, very famous for this particular series of artworks called the 36 Views of Mount Fuji, of which the artwork we're going to look at today was one of those 36 views. So I'm not sure which number 16 or 27 or whatever, but it was one of the 36 views of Mount Fuji. And Mount Fuji is seen by many people in Japan, especially in the past, as having sacred qualities and as being kind of central to a lot of Japanese culture. So what's interesting about that is if we go back to the actual, this print, which he's very famous for, is you can see in the background here is Mount Fuji. It's this tiny little, it appears to be small, and it appears to be about to be swallowed up by this giant wave. There are other images in that series which feature the mountain much more prominently, but the idea is it's in every single one of those prints, and we see the life of people going about their day, and the mountain kind of looming high or small in the life of Japanese people at the time. So let me see, what else do I want to briefly talk about? He's very famous for working in this particular style or art form, the ukiyo-e. I spent like 20 minutes trying to get this name down, and I already know I butchered it, so I'm not going to say it 5 more times and do it 5 different ways. But actually, if you watch this video here, he mentions it right about here. Let me see, can we...
Style and then process developed in the Edo period of time in Japan.
So I couldn't actually hear that, so I'm not sure if it came across, because, but that is the particular kind of art form he was working in. And what I think is really interesting about Hokusai is that creating these prints in the way that he did, they were intended for mass distribution. He wanted his art to be seen by as many people as possible. So they were printed on relatively thin, cheap paper that was available at the time, so that anybody could in Japan afford to buy one of these images, right? Which is very different if we think about, especially in the Western world, what art was for, who it was for, who was able to see it. If we go back to like the mid 1700s, if you wanted to see art, you know, and we're talking like the high art of the, you know, the French royal court, or, you know, the German or English, you know, or even American, like you had to be a very wealthy person, or a king, a queen, or someone high up in the church, right? That was based, or you could go to some churches would have art on the walls, obviously. So that's another way that Hokusai really, you know, his art was like a little what does he call it? Like an ear virus or a mind virus. It kind of, once it started spreading around the world, it had profound impacts on things. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Another thing that I just think is super cool is Hokusai, you know, if you recognize this word, manga, which goes back to, I don't think he invented the term, but manga, today we think of manga as comic books, Japanese comic books. And you could see Hokusai wanted to create this book, this volume, that included 30,000 paintings and sketches, woodcuts, prints. He basically wanted to describe all of human knowledge in a series of like Encyclopedia Britannicas, and wanted to illustrate everything from cats and dogs to different types of clouds and clothing and sandals and latches on doors, and, you know, like everything, and different people's facial expressions, happy people, sad people. He wanted to describe all of what was known in his drawings and create these volumes, which I think is so cool. That would be a long-term goal of mine. Let's get right into his art, because often I don't want to spend too much time on this. I do want to show you, I'm not going to show you the video, but this is a great video by PBS, which is specifically all about the context within which this painting or print, the painting we're going to make based on this print, under which it was made, and a little bit about Hokusai's biography. So if you want to check that out, that is also available. So let's just take a really quick look at some of his art. And obviously the first thing when we Google Hokusai that comes up is this image of the Great Wave. Although incidentally, it's not actually called the Great Wave, like a number of other things. This is sort of how it was renamed once it sort of got absorbed into Western pop culture. But I believe it's something more closely aligned. It's, let me see if it even says here. It's like Under the Great Wave, I think is the technical original word. Under the Wave off of Kanagawa. So, because it's Mount Fuji, appears to be under the wave. And it's also, if we look at this larger version, all about these poor fishermen who are laying prostrate on these boats, who've just dropped off their fish at port and are headed back home. There's this big wave that is just about to completely crush them under its, you know, these kind of tentacle-like forms, right? So let's just take another quick look at some of these just amazing images. Hokusai was, you know, as we go on, we can talk about sort of the world that he was living in at the time. Japan was, you know, increasingly trading with the West after being closed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And one of the main features of this painting, we'll talk about the color, it sort of documents in a almost invisible or not explicit way of how international trade was sort of transforming Japanese society, because this color that he's using, Prussian blue, was not available to Japanese artists before, because it was from Prussia, right? And so also there's we see in his art, he's one of the first Japanese artists to start using perspective, geometric perspective, as we talked to. Have we talked about that? We've talked about it in our drawing class that I did, which is a whole other topic I won't get into. But let me see any of these other images I want to just mention. I think we'll jump right into it, and we'll talk about why some of the particularly impressionists were really into his art. So let's make this painting here. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is get some materials out. So I've got my paint brushes. I'm gonna grab a bunch of paint. Potentially a few little rags, and my sanding block. And I'm going to sand 2 canvases here, and I know as soon as a second canvas comes out, people are like, oh no, this is going to be another 4-hour class, so everybody brace yourself. But it's because I want to just quickly demonstrate a different way of getting the image onto the canvas. Okay, quick little sand. So 2 nice smooth pieces of canvas. So I'm going to use a tracing method to get this onto the canvas. And I've demonstrated many times different ways to do this using just charcoal or graphite rubbed onto the back. So the Warhol episode is probably where I did this most thoroughly. I've done it in subsequent other episodes, so I'm not going to go through there and explain once again how to do it. If you want, you can watch those. I am going to use this here. This is a carbon paper. Graphite paper is exactly the same thing. I will put a link to that in the video description below if you want to order a pack of that. You should probably be able to afford they probably cost maybe somewhere between $5 to $10 for a pack of 12 like that. Let me just zoom out. Okay. So, got that. I'm going to take a little bit of tape, just because this is a little bit more of a complex image. So I'm going to put a little bit of tape there. Helps keep it secure so it's not doing too much moving around. Not that that's such a big deal, because again, this is just our under drawing. So it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to cover it with paint. I'm also going to grab a red pencil here. I like using just a slightly different color so that I can see which lines I've already drawn over. And let's just make sure. Sometimes I do all this and then I realize there's actually no graphite paper or anything underneath there. So I'm also, as I do this, I'm not going to worry about drawing every single little part of this wave here. I'm going to draw the main parts of it. And you'll see in the all of those templates, the outlines I've put up there on the Dropbox, I've drawn in every little detail, or well, 95% of the details, so that I'm just showing. You see how it's transferring across there, right? But when I'm tracing this out onto another piece of paper, I'm not really gonna go and read. Personally, I wouldn't spend my time going over every single line here. I'm only going to do what is most important and then kind of disregard the rest, because this is really just to kind of help me figure out where the basic shapes should go here. Now, all of this, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what this is. This is either a combination of his signature as well as potentially the title of the work. So this would be probably a little bit too difficult for most of us to paint, unless you had a very small paintbrush. So I'm just going to set that aside because I don't think it's going to be critical to our artwork for today. And you can make decisions to add or eliminate different things in your picture. So see, I'm just sort of skipping over a few things here. And you know, some of these, the main reason why I've chosen today's artwork to happen today is so that we can spend a little bit of time learning and how to do some of these finer details with one of your smaller brushes, right? So we're going to do a little bit of detailed work with the paintbrush, and we'll talk about how to do that. There's always a method behind the madness here, so if you're ever wondering, why are we doing this today? It's usually because I have some particular goal in mind that I think is important, and that we can use one of these artworks to help build one of these foundational skills. So you see how I'm just going to put a few of these things in here. I'm not going to go through all those details. A boat, however, is a big detail. Right? Just when you look at this, you just think these poor little guys, because you often don't see them at first. In fact, the original, as far as I've been able to kind of tell from some of the research I was doing, is that some of the early versions of this print, because just like any print, you can make as many of them as you'd like, and you can change things as you print them. So some of the early versions actually are much more monochrome and are mostly just that Prussian blue. And so these figures, who are in blue as well on the water, are a little bit hard to discern from the water itself. So sometimes, if you were to look at some of those versions of that print, you may not even realize that there are people, who are about to be completely absorbed by the ocean here. Okay. So, let's just take a quick little look at this and see what our results are. Cool. So I've got kind of a very faint outline of some of those details. There's still lots of stuff I haven't painted, but that's okay. I think we've got the most important stuff has been transferred to the canvas. Right? So you probably want to keep this. I always keep these things laying around just because I might want to refer to them. It might be a little bit easier to look at this than looking at a computer screen all the time, which can be, you know, a little bit hard on the eyes after a while. So if you're printing that out, it can be helpful. And again, like I've used some of these sheets 3 or 4 times, so I'm just going to preserve that again because I can use it for probably get away with a couple more tracings. And let's put this back in the envelope. We'll do that later. Okay, so we've got this version, so let's move that off to the side. Now I want to introduce a different material. Now you don't have to run out and get this, but I think you may find this helpful, especially for the Vermeer episode we're going to do in a few weeks. So I've got Mod Podge makes lots of different materials. There is, oh, we'll go through, I can't fit them all on the screen at once. And this is just a small, they have like, I think another 6 different kinds for different purposes. But for our sake right now, for today, I'm just going to talk about these 2, these are their kind of flagship Mod Podge jars or materials or substances or however we want to talk about them. So, and they are pretty much identical. The only difference is one is matte or pearl, as it's sometimes called, and one is glossy, or what is the other? I forget some companies they like to use fancy names to kind of sound a little bit different, but basically gloss or shiny and matte or not shiny. So I'm going to use some of the matte version. Often people will use the gloss version as a sealant on top of potentially a painting, or you know, people use this for sealing puzzles after you finish a puzzle. And what gloss does is it tends to make colors appear brighter and the blacks to appear darker and more solid, and therefore to give it almost kind of appears to amp up the saturation of an image. So let's say you print an image out of your computer, like a color picture of your family, and it kind of looks a little bit dull. If you were to put some gloss over it, as you do what we're about to do here, it might make it look like a photograph as we might expect it to be, kind of nice and shiny, and the colors to be a little bit more saturated rather than dull. I'm going to use the matte just because that's personally my preference. I like things that aren't shiny. I think it's because of my background using oil paints, which tend to be a little bit less reflective. You can make them very shiny if you want to, but most of the time they come out a little bit dull looking, which I like personally. Okay, I just need to take a tea break here. I was talking to my doctor today, who says I need to stop drinking tea and caffeine after noon, after 12 in the afternoon. Oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do that. I'm a huge tea drinker, and I'm the kind of person who like will pour themselves a cup of tea at like 9 o'clock at night, and then I wonder why I sometimes can't fall asleep till 2 in the morning. Oh no. Okay, so here's Amateur Hour featuring Michael Markowsky. Here's a brush that I obviously didn't clean very well because it's kind of stiff. If this happens to you, just while what you can do is you can put it in some water and just let it sit for a few hours, and maybe by the end of today we'll see if that brush has loosened up a little bit. There is, I don't think I have it here, but there are some materials you can spray to like clean your floor that will strip acrylic off. So if you had graffiti on your garage door, you could spray that on there. From Home Depot, I can't remember what the brand is. Anyway, I've used that on brushes and it seems to work, but I think it also eats away at the brush itself. So I'm just gonna shake this up. Sue says I'm trying to the decaf tea and decaf coffee afternoon. I guess I gotta. I think I don't even think it's the caffeine that I like so much. It's just the taste of Earl Grey and English breakfast. Those are my jams. Okay. So here's this Mod Podge. Okay, and this is a skin that is formed here. Anybody out there who likes your kombucha? Okay, so Mod Podge kind of smells a little bit like white glue, it's very similar. I don't know the chemical differences and similarities, but it has a very similar kind of function to white glue. You can use Mod Podge to glue things to your canvas, which we're about to do. We're going to use it for collaging. One thing is, one of the great things with Mod Podge is that unlike a lot of other substances, when you use it to collage paper, newsprint, magazines to a canvas, one thing it does really well is it usually is really good at eliminating wrinkles, or not completely eliminating wrinkles, especially if you have super thin paper like rice paper, it's probably going to wrinkle anyway. You can use a spray glue, can work well for that, but especially when it's really thin, spraying that spray glue can make the rice paper move around. Anyway, blah blah blah, let's move on to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally glue this onto the surface here. I want this image to be on here, and then I can paint over top of this image. So it's another way for you to quote unquote like cheat to get this image onto the canvas and then paint over top of it. So if you paint thickly enough, right? Then you might be able to completely hide that image. No one would ever know that it was there. Okay, so I'm going to quickly cover this surface. And now that I'm doing this, do I have my brayer? I'll have to look around for it. A roller. Okay. So I'm going to put a little bit much on there. So we're going to spread this around. And once I've got it pretty good here, I'm going to just take, and I'm just doing this because I've got a lot on here. What you should do, I'm just going to move that out of the way. Looks like I got pretty much everything covered. So then what I would do is then take my brush and then make sure this is also nicely covered. So we want to make sure every little bit of this paper is covered, especially these edges here. I'll go right to the edges. Okay, and then we'll bring the canvas back. And then we can put this in here. You have a little bit of leeway about positioning it for about a good 30-40 seconds. And then we're going to push it down. Don't worry about if you get stuff on the front. We will put some paint over top of the front in a few moments here. You can see I can still move it around if I want, right? can see I can still kind of twist it until I get it into the right place. If you have a very thin layer, it's kind of hard to do that, but... Right, okay. Let me see if I have... Huh. Where are my... Oh, let me see if I can reach this. Okay, I thought I had somewhere in here, once I get to the spring cleaning, my yearly spring cleaning, I'll find it, but somewhere around here I have like a brayer, a roller that looks like, you know, like a paint roller if you're going to paint your bedroom or something. It kind of looks like that, but it's got a harder plastic instead of a soft brush for paint, right? So instead, I'm just going to use whatever I have around, which could be like a rolling pin from your kitchen. And I'm just going to kind of gently, in this case, this is just another Mod Podge. This one's photo transfer, which we will eventually use as well. And if you don't have that, you can also use your fingers. It's a little bit less even. The whole point is just to try to make sure we don't get the bubbles underneath. And ideally what you're doing is you're moving from the center, pushing things outward. Okay. And you want to wait for this to dry for about 20 minutes. See if you get a little bit of stuff on the surface. That's totally fine. We'll wait for this to dry for about 20 minutes, and then after that, we're going to put another coat of the Mod Podge over top of it to help seal in that surface. And you do want to wait. One of the mistakes that I have made over and over again is I just get impatient and I just start putting the Mod Podge over top, and that is what ends up causing it to do a little bit of wrinkling. Right? So whereas this looks like it's sealing in well enough. Okay, so I'll show you how I would use this when it dries, which will be probably closer towards the end of today's class. But right off, here you go. You've got your drawing transferred onto the canvas, which obviously has way more detail than this. You know, we can just, let's take a look at them side by side here. Right, so if you did want to get some of those tiny details, like in the signature, right, doing this kind of image transfer or collage onto the canvas would certainly be the way to go. You know, I could also literally trim this, cut this out, and glue it onto the surface as well. Right, so if I'm not able to paint it, I could cut it out and glue it on here with Mod Podge as well. So lots of different options with that material. So I'm going to just set this aside, and we'll come back to that shortly. Oh, and Laura's back, and Charmaine. Wow, there we go. A couple of names I haven't seen in a while. That's great to have you guys back again. And I know Laura sent me another email. It's been very busy. Yesterday was my first day back at Emily Carr, the university, the art school I teach at here in Vancouver. So it's, you know, right after the holidays, there's the holidays, and then it's right back into the swing of life and getting classes set up and all that stuff. So, and I find most of the work I do, it takes place before classes start, and then once the classes get going, then it sort of everything takes care of itself. So I'm just going to leave that brush in there. Whenever I'm using a adhesive material, that's something that I tend to be a little bit more concerned about that damaging the brush or drying in the brush. So just like the reason why this brush or the other one seized up, remember I told you this one, you know, it's still pretty stiff, is because I was filming a couple of other things over the weekend that aren't live streams, but I'll eventually publish, and those will be another couple little surprises I have in the works for everybody coming down the tubes. Okay, so let me just clear up a little bit of space here, and let's get some paint on the palette. Okay, I think I need my tea again here. And Steven, my uncle-in-law, my wife's uncle is watching us. Steven, oh, that's great. We haven't heard from you in a while too. This is great. It's like a little reunion here happening. Some faces and names I haven't seen in a while. So welcome everybody. This is great. Okay, so let's doing lots of putzing around here. Let's get some paint on the palette. I haven't even thought about the colors, so I'm just going to put them all on here. Sometimes, you know, if we're painting a painting that's got a very limited color palette, then there's no point in putting all the colors out on here. This painting is limited in the amount of colors that are on there, but I think it will still benefit us to have most of the colors available to us. Which is another good reason not to put too much paint onto your palette so you don't have to waste too much of it. If you don't use it. Okay. So, what colors are we going to put on here? Well, let's take a look at the original and see if we can find any clues as to how we should go about this next step. So, if we look, so remember this is a print, so I would imagine that this color that we're seeing right here, I bet you that that is the color of the paper. We can see a little bit of it on these edges around here. I bet you this is the same color that's here. It just looks different since it's been separated with a black outline. So it looks like that same color's there. So technically this kind of warm brown is probably our background color. Now does that mean we want to use that color? Maybe. Again, we're going to be using it, we're painting it rather than making a print. Totally different process, so we have a lot of different options, so it's kind of up to us how we want to proceed on here. There is this other kind of less, so basically these are the same colors, but this one has been tinted and this one is kind of just a warm brownish orange really. And then we have in here looks like a very dark warm blue, and then another warm blue which has been tinted a bit, and then this blue also looks like a warm blue, maybe a little bit of cold blue in there as well. So there's most of this painting has warmer colors in it, and what I think is interesting, and why, how to say this, and I think that is really important because I think that was one of the things that painters like Claude Monet and Van Gogh and Mary Cassatt, who were huge fans of Hokusai, when they saw this work come across their eyes, was because they believed that Hokusai and some of his Japanese contemporaries were kind of flattening space And one of the techniques to create space is to have opposing warm and cool colors. So if we're all using all warm colors, then we're going to have less depth in a color image anyway, right? So I think they saw that and like, oh, that's interesting. What's that about? And what's the irony is that because of this global trade, is Hokusai was sort of one of the first Japanese artists to use perspective, which is a technique to create space, right? So what's interesting is Hokusai might have been trying to do what some of the European artists were doing, and because a lot of Japanese art prior to this time does not use geometric perspective at all, and it has a kind of flat quality. So he was trying to probably, I'm just off the top of my head looking at his artwork and thinking, I think Hokusai was trying to get more space and trying to do something different than thousands of years of Japanese artists before him. But the European artist looking at his art thought, oh, here's somebody who's got some like flatness in the work because of the colors. That's really cool. Let's go and try to embrace a little bit more of that flatness. So maybe a little bit of confusion, the lines getting crossed, but anyway, that's just me rambling. I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, so I still, regardless, even if that's what Hokusai was going to do, I still am going to kind of encourage us to maybe put a little bit of cooler colors in the background and warmer colors in the foreground. If you want to use all warm colors and have a little bit more of less depth in the picture, by all means, you should go for it. I just want to kind of, I know it's kind of a long way around that, but just explaining that what I'm teaching you guys is certainly not what the artists themselves were trying to do. And so I'm just using this artwork as a method to give us some content for us to make paintings and learn a little bit about art techniques. Does that make any sense? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this background here with a cool brown, right? So to make a cool brown, what I'm going to use is my cool yellow, my cool blue, and my cool red. So by mixing three cool colors together, they are going to create a cooler brown, right? If I wanted to create a warmer brown, I could use warm yellow, warm red, and warm blue, right? And we did this, I can't remember which episode, we did a couple of different warm, and maybe it was the Claude Monet we did that, the different browns. Anyway, so I'm going to take my cool yellow. Let's take a bit of cool blue, mix that in. So now we've got a nice, bright, super saturated green. I'm gonna eventually need some more yellow, so let's just put that out there. So we can dip into it as needed. Okay, and then I'm gonna reach across to the cool red, right? So now we're going right across through the neutral core. So this color gets quite dull quite quickly. Okay. So then we can take a look at the original here, and we'll just see how close we are. I don't think we're near there yet, but okay. So one of the things that we require is a lot more, we need some white in here. So if you look at this brown has a very greenish quality. It's a little bit like looks a little bit like vomit or something, right? Let's put a little bit more white in here. And that white will also help it move a little bit further back into the distance. Let's put some red in here. So we're getting into the ballpark here. Again, we're expecting this color to be a little bit different than the color that he used, right? Just as a reminder, when people are like, those colors are different, well, we're intending them to be a little bit different, right? Okay, so I'm going to take this color, and I think I'm going to put this in the sky here. And if you look at this and you think, whoa, that is an unpleasantly dark color, well, then you can lighten it up if you like. That is pretty dark. So if I find it's too dark, I'm going to add more white to it anyway to get. So we'll just see. We'll just mix this in. That's a little bit better. Not quite as. Okay. Now pretty much everything in this painting is going to be outlined, right? So I don't have to worry too much about it being, about whether the colors are overlapping. Okay, so if I've got that, let's get rid of some of that excess. I'm now going to just scoop up this white here. I'm going to use that white to get into these areas here. You can see that I'm now kind of blowing out some of those sharp peaks in the wave, right? Okay, so you can decide how you want to blend this in. If you want these to be a sharper distinction between those. Oh, now I'm going to look. I haven't really been looking at the painting itself. I'm just sort of getting absorbed into my own here. So let's see. Let's get a little bit more cloud-like. Okay. Quite like that color. It kind of has it looks kind of like a shiny coppery, or not copper, what color is that? Maybe a bit of a copper quality. Okay, so personally I like that. I know it's darker than the original. If you want it to be lighter, I would just add more white to it. So let's get rid of some of this. Well, actually, you know what? Let's just take, before I clean all that off, I'm just going to take a look at the other one here. Because I also want to put my other layer of Mod Podge on there. So what the reason why I'm pushing here is I'm trying to feel if there's still wet areas of paint underneath. Like, because it's still a little bit soft, which is telling me there's still some areas of the paint is still wet. And because I've got the paper on one side is dry and the canvas underneath is dry, the paint is sort of, the wet paint is sandwiched in between two dry layers. So it does take longer for that Mod Podge to get air to it to dry off, right? So that's why a little bit, the longer you wait, the more successful you're going to be about getting rid of wrinkles. Now, we're here doing this live, so I don't have the luxury of waiting too long here. So I am going to put some of the Mod Podge on top right now, just because I want to get this I want to get this painting kind of rolling here around the same time that I'm working on this. So let's just, we'll cross our fingers and hope that under layer, the original layer, has had a bit of opportunity to dry. Another little quick thing is I printed this from my inkjet printer onto the canvas, or onto the paper. So this ink doesn't really fully dry as much as we might want it to. And you may have seen that. You print out your resume and you're walking around handing it to people, and then the ink starts to smudge a little bit as your fingers, or sweaty fingers, are touching it or something, right? So I really want to be careful that I'm not doing too much scrubbing in with any wet material. Otherwise, this ink could start spreading and smudging around, right? So I've got everything in here. The purpose of putting Mod Podge over top is also to do sort of what the underside has done, which is to stabilize the paper so that it's not going to shrink or contract anymore. So that, assuming the bottom side has become nice and dry, it's going to, now everything is kind of stretched evenly across the canvas here. Okay. And one of the things with Mod Podge is it dries usually pretty quickly, like surprisingly quick. So this, I think this top layer should be dry in about 5-10 minutes or so. So maybe while that's happening, I'm just going to move on to the rest of the painting, and then I'll, depending on how this paint that I've mixed previously works out, I may mix a little bit more of it, or we'll play it by ear. Okay. Just while I'm right here, if you're finding this helpful, I would very much appreciate if you could press the like button, press the subscribe button, especially if you're a newer subscriber. Hit the notification bell so you find out when the new classes are coming up. And if you're feeling really generous, there's a link to the PayPal below where you could leave a small donation. And I've seen, it says Ace already donated $6.99, but I think Ace is the partner account to, I'm sorry, I can't remember who. Oh, it's Paula. There you are, Paula from Alberta. So thank you so much, Paula, for using the super chat function. So if you can also, or you want, you can also contribute money directly through YouTube as well. And you'll see that right where you would leave a comment in the live chat. So thank you so much, Paula, for doing that. All of those donations is what is helping provide all of this opportunity for everybody. So I'm very, very grateful for your continued support. Okay, so let's now continue working on this. What would be our next step here? Well, the next step would be to get some of the blue. Well, the question is, do we want to put the white or the blue in here next? So there's different thoughts about this. Some people would paint the white and then paint the blue. Some people would paint the blue and then some people would paint the white. I am going to suggest we paint the blue and then we go back and paint white over top of it, especially because we've got these little tentacle kind of things, and I think painting those with the white is going to be a little bit easier because we're going to be able to cover up any areas with the blue that we were not quite as precise as maybe we hoped to be. So just want to kind of I always try to explain why I'm making the decisions I'm making so that rather than just do them. Okay, so let's what color do we want to mix here to get that blue? So we're going to use our warm blue, and then we can also use some white. Okay, that we could mix into that. So the first bit of blue is going to be the blue right out of the tube, really dark blue. Dark, warm blue. And let's put the lid back on my Mod Podge here. Okay. So you can also see that there's these kind of stripes in the blue. I'm going to just paint the whole thing blue and then paint the white stripes or the lighter blue stripes on afterwards, because I think that would just kind of be a little bit easier. So the way that I'm going to do this is sort of like just little kind of blobs. Like you see, are kind of little semicircles like this. Think of it like when we did the Banksy, like they're little balloons or something, right? So you'll see with this dark, or the blue, the warm blue tends to be relatively transparent, right? Which can be a little bit frustrating. Which means we may have to come back over top of it later. I'm not being too concerned about painting this exactly the way it looks in the picture, just as a heads up. I'm going to have to make a few little simplifications as we go here. Oops. So I just have to let that dry and then do another coat of it later on. Okay. So this is the quickest, dirtiest way to do this, right? It's and we're not going to get absolute precision If you want absolute precision, well, we've got that other painting that we began using the transfer, or not even transfer, we just collaged that paper directly onto the surface. And that's going to help, you know, if you want, you know, as close to an exact copy of the original as possible. That would help you get there. Another option would be to do a very light wash, and to do washes this way and then paint white over top afterwards. That could work. You'll see some of the stuff that I'm doing down here in the bottom is my own invention. This is stuff that, because the aspect ratio of the original painting was a little bit more kind of letterboxed, I've just gone in and extended it and drawn extra stuff down the bottom here. So the actual painting kind of cuts off down here. So if you're like, oh, how come that's not in the photo? That's why. Okay, so now I'm going to come in here. I will say, the more I'm working on this right now, the more I do think maybe a wash would have been a good way of proceeding here. So it's possible that I might do that after I finish all of this and just start the painting over again a second time and try a different approach. But sometimes you never really know the best way to proceed until you're doing it, right? And then you have an option as to continue or to turn back and start again, right? So this is stuff I didn't even trace on here, and I'm just doing that right now. This is where the painting ended, and so this I'll probably put white back over there and fix that. Let's see, we've got these figures on here. I'm just going to paint them right over with the blue. Okay. So, there's a good head start on things. Let's get our underpainting. Okay, let's blast it. Okay, so while this is, now that I've got that dry, I'm going to just quickly put another coat of darker blue over this previous layer. And if you're wondering about what I was just kind of talking about, how I would approach this painting differently, I'm just going to do that when I do the other version here, where I transfer the photo onto the collage, the photo directly onto the canvas. So this second layer, I don't have to be quite as precise. I mean, obviously, the more carefully that I do this, the better. But this is really just to give it a little bit of a deeper, darker blue. It doesn't have to be all dark blue like this too. You could certainly have variations where the water could be lighter and darker in some places, and you can kind of riff off of what Hokusai did. The great thing with his style and this outline technique, which we're going to use here shortly, is it's a great way of cleaning up any areas that you are kind of maybe a little bit sloppier with. Almost done all this here. Paint in the sky there. Nothing a little bit of saliva can't fix, eh? You make a little mistake, just get your little spit on it, wipe it away. So, then as I often want to do, I like just to cover some of the edges a bit. Okay, boom. So I'm going to set this aside, and let's take a look at the other version. I'm just going to put a little bit more paint. This is just a bit of a pet peeve of mine, is edges on paintings. I feel like the edges, artists ignore the edge of the picture, and they, and it's often, it's not like we're looking at something totally flat when we're looking at a painting. We often see it maybe from the side as we come into a room, and when the edges look unfinished, it just sort of cheapens the rest of the painting. So, okay, so let's now, I want to put the paint on the rest of this picture, and why not, we're going to do something just a little bit different. This, the Mod Podge on top looks like it's nice and dry too, so. And it's also going to be a smooth surface to paint on, assuming I didn't have any, like that, little areas where things, bugs or got stuck to, or you painted it really, you know, quite thickly, and you have some kind of peaks from the paint. Okay. So this time, I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to paint a very light blue over all of this, and then I can paint white and darker blue over, right? So it's a slight modification of what we did, and or maybe let's paint the sky here first. So I'll put that brush in there. Okay, so maybe this time I will paint the sky a little bit more lightly. So I'll go into this white here. So I'm basically going to start it with almost the same lightness as the light part of the previous version of the painting, right? So, you know what, let's just do this whole thing. I'm going to paint over all of this. Because the point of these black lines is not to preserve them, it's just like we're using these lines as guidelines. Alright, so you see me just sort of boldly going in there, crossing over top of them in a few places. So the only trouble, I guess if you want to call it trouble, is that you might see like the edge of the paper like this showing through, which doesn't really bother me, but you could either use, if you decide to frame it, you could frame over it, or you could paint really thick right over top, and you could add a little even modeling paste into the paint to kind of cover up some of those areas. If it's or you could do some kind of, you could draw or paint a frame around that too. Maybe we could even do that towards the end of today, just so we can see, kind of play it by ear and see how that works. Okay. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and paint the sky a little bit darker or even lighter. We'll see how it dries. Okay, so let's paint the water now. I could imagine there's a few of you who are like, huh, well, why are we, like, you're using a slightly different approach to this painting than you did with the other painting. Like, which approach should I be using? Which approach is better? And the answer is it just sort of depends, and it's a little bit of just like personal preference as to which way you find easier to work. We've done a lot, I would say probably the last 20 videos where we've done washes to start with and then added detail on top of those washes. And I think that is generally a good practice to get into, because you cover the whole surface of the picture right off the bat. You don't really have to worry about colors matching or like butting up against one another and the white of the canvas showing through. So it can be a little bit more forgiving that way, especially as a beginner. But there are times where you may not want to do that. You might want to have the canvas showing through, right? So it's just, especially if you're doing collage, like let's say this was a full color image and there was like a particular color or pattern in here, I don't want to cover it, right? So in that instance, maybe a wash wouldn't be as effective. What is this comment? Adonis says, I hope you do that to the kiddo, like cleaning her off with my spit. Spit on a Kleenex to wash their face. Anyone go through that as a kid, or am I the only one? Oh yeah, that's I think every child has to deal with the indignity of their parents using their spit to clean things off their face. Our daughter has gotten ample helpings of my saliva for sure. Okay, so let's just take a look at this here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to mix a color that is like this slightly kind of teal, light baby blue color. And I'm going to cover this whole thing with that color, right? So slightly different approach to this same kind of situation. So I'm going to use this white. Got lots of white on my brush. In fact, let's probably need a little bit more of it. Lots of white, because we're just going to kind of dilute it with a little bit of blue. It's a nice color. It does feel like right now it's a little bit purpley, right? And that's to be expected because it's a warm color, so it's got a little bit of red. But let's add a little bit of the cool blue in there. Whoa, look at that. Nice, kind of icy water color now. So it's like we used a combination of both of these blues. Right, and this color would look different if I just added this. It would look really, really kind of electric. Right, so I want a kind of a combination of the two. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to brush it over the whole thing, including my pencil lines. So a few of you are gasping like Marlon Brando at the end of Apocalypse Now. The horror. The horror. Like, no, all the lines, they're gone. How will we ever know what to do? Where do we paint all of these images? Have no fear. Those lines will return as this starts to dry. Now remember, we're going to go over this with some black so we can bring out those lines again. This is also a good way to kind of hide the photocopy or the printout if you use this technique, right? By going over it with another color, it sort of gets absorbed into the surface of the picture. Now, are we going to lose a bunch of detail, and is it going to be a little bit trickier to see some of the those lines and to know exactly where to paint? Absolutely, yes, it will be. But as it dries, we're going to get a little bit of that clarity back. Okay, let's just go in here. Now I'm going to paint some of this white again later, but I just want to kind of get rid of some of the black lines a bit here and just create a bit more of an even surface. Okay. You know, I know that it can be a little bit frustrating, like not knowing which way to proceed or which technique to use when you're painting. But I actually think it's quite liberating to realize that, oh, there's lots of different ways to do this. There's no correct one way, only way to do it. I can kind of mix and match and find the approach that works best for me. And then, okay. So let's now hit this with the blow dryer. We're going to see some of the imagery appear. Some of it will be a little bit pretty hard to see. Okay, so there's you probably I can see most of the details through this. It probably doesn't come up too well on the camera, or at least on my monitor. It looks kind of like one big solid block, but I do see some of the details. If you felt like this was, you know, as you're painting it and you're really worried about the coverage, just add a little bit of water to dilute it, to thin it out so that it's a little bit more transparent. So when you're doing this, you could still see some of the details through. But again, one of the strategies using this might be to hide the evidence of that thing being there originally. So if you want that, then you would probably want to cover it up a little bit more. Although it may or may not defeat the purpose. Okay, so I'm going to kind of jump back and forth a little bit. Let's go back to this one here, and I'm going to keep on working on that for a short period of time. Now I'm looking at this and my sky. Let's look at this original. How do I feel about that sky being so dark? This one, not nearly as dark. I think I am going to lighten this whole thing up, just like I did the other one, right? Why not? So this paint is still kind of wet there, so more white on my brush here. I'm just going to scoop up some of this. It's a little intense, but I think I like that. Okay. So now obviously down here, we'll have to lighten that up. And I think I'm going to let that dry and then lighten it up. And then shortly here. Yeah, I like that. I like that a little bit better. And, you know, I think it's important to be able to change your mind while you're working on things. And it's never too late to do this. So maybe while that dries, I'll go back to here and I'm going to lighten up this area where the clouds were. So I'm just going to take this, we're going to add a lot more white to it. I think you could also see why I really like painting multiple paintings at the same time. You know, I'm sure it could be a little bit frustrating watching, because they're just like, oh, now he's kind of gone back a step and I gotta wait for him to catch up. I think at this point you should be able to do a lot of the stuff on your own while I'm off farting around doing my own thing, but what I really like about painting multiple paintings at the same time is that it's sort of like I get a second chance at doing something. So if I'm working on it and things aren't going the way I want, well, I can kind of, oh, you know what, I'm just going to fix that here. And sometimes when I do that on the second painting, just like I'm doing kind of right now, like, you know what, I like that so much, I'm going to go back and make some changes to the other one. Okay. Oh, you know what? I just noticed that gradient that was there. I don't know how I missed that. The hundreds of times I looked at this. Okay, well, I don't think I'm going to bother doing that today. I'm just going to keep on plowing forward. Okay, so let's put this. I'm probably going to have to even go a little bit more white on this. Okay. A little bit closer to the so-called original, because there are. The interesting thing with a print is which is the original. Clean a bunch of brushes at the moment. Hey, and there's my good old friend Sam, the musician who did the theme for the show, plays quietly in the background. Good to see you, Sammy. Sam just moved a few blocks away from me, but because of this crazy world we're living in right now, he might as well be living on the other side of the world. We haven't seen one another since he moved down the street. Okay, so we've got the sky. I feel like I'm pretty happy with the sky. I'm ready to go back into the waves and add a little more detail into these waves. So what should I do here first? think while I've got this light blue mixed, I'm going to use a bit of that right now. Do some highlights of that blue. Okay, so we're going to come back to this here. I need some more. Scoop some of this. Hopefully I didn't get too much of that brown in there. That's a lot of blue. Okay, I just need a bit more white. So, if you've been following along to every single episode, you're probably getting low on the white. You're probably, of all the colors, I imagine that one would be the one that has the least amount of paint left in it. And then the black is the one that feels like it's barely used, barely opened. Right? So, when it comes to like painting, depending on the painting you're doing, generally the black is the one that's gonna stick around for the longest time. Okay, so I'll show you just what I'm doing here. I'm gonna just paint this light blue around here, kind of like what I you know how I did the previous one. I just coated the whole thing with this. I'm just putting it. This is because this is kind of like on the underside of the wave. So I'm just gonna put a bunch of it under here like this. Again, it's not precise. I'm kind of just eyeballing it and just going, okay, because I'm going to paint white over a bunch of this anyway to clean it up. Obviously on the other painting, this is sort of like our underpainting color. So we're going to paint white around it. But it's, you know, the addition of colors like this where all of a sudden the painting, you start feeling a little bit more depth kind of coming into it. Okay. I think that's pretty good. Okay. One thing which I haven't forgotten is Mount Fuji way off in the background there. So I'm going to put a cool blue rather than the warm blue out there. I know that in the original, they're pretty much the same colors that he uses here and here, which again is one way that it creates a little bit of confusion, I think deliberately, between the mountain and the ocean, right? Because they're painted the same color and they kind of have similar kinds of shapes. They look side by side, which is why the Great Wave appears to be, you know, just swallowing up the mountain. And the original title of this painting, again, or the print, is under the Great Wave, or under the wave of Kanagawa, right? So, but despite that, and this may just be blasphemous, but I'm going to use a cool color just because I want to try to reinforce some of the lessons that we've been doing in class. Okay, so if we look at this again, let's paint some of this. I'm going to take cool blue, and I'm going to add just a tiny bit of white to it, just so it's not super right out of the tube. Also, that white is going to help give it a little bit more atmosphere. And this might be the only place in this painting where we see this color. Okay, it's just a little bit of that. Nice. Okay, in fact, while we've got this color on our brush, I'm just going to swap these out and do the same thing on this one. Now, I'm going to paint white to clean up things anyway, so I'm not too worried about being too perfect there, but okay. Cool. So now, I think with this one, I'm going to start putting the blue, the dark blue that I had that I did on this one. I'm going to put that onto this one. So we're going to turn this back to here. Although, you know what? I think just for the interests of time, I think why don't we, I'm just going to focus on bringing this one to a resolution, and then I'll work on the other one afterwards, so that people, so it doesn't, the video will still be long, but at least you'll be able to kind of see me finish one before you maybe have to run for dinner. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to put in some of these slightly lighter kind of stripes into the blue water here. I'm just going to touch this up. Okay, so that slightly lighter blue. And I'm just going to take some white. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of that cool blue. In fact, I think I want a little more of that to get this color. That's nice. Okay, I like that color a lot. And I'm just going to switch to a smaller paintbrush. And okay. So, you know what, I'm just going to blast this with the hairdryer. I'm going to blow dry this and dry it down because I want to be able to, I'm starting to get into the smaller brushes, and as I do that, I might want to rest my hand on the painting, and I don't have to worry about paint getting on my hand. Okay, and before I do that, I also just want to make sure not only is the canvas dry, but that I don't have wet paint on my hand. Now you can use, you know, you could take a piece of paper. That one's got lines all over it. You could put a piece of paper down like this to be extra sure, just to, every time you, before you move the paper and reposition it, you just want to make sure, okay, I don't have no paint stuck off there, because you want a big glob of paint, and then you take it and then you slide it across, right? So that would be another option if you wanted, just to be absolutely sure that you're not. I also, there's other things. When I work on much larger canvases, and obviously you can see I like working on a table rather than on an easel. That's a whole other conversation we're getting into, but I have these sticks of wood that I can put down, and then another stick of wood on top kind of acts like a little bridge which I can rest my arm and hand over, so my hand never actually touches the canvas itself. Okay, I need a sip of water here. Paula says, I used a fan brush to make the wave. It is much easier. I'm sure everybody would be very interested to see how you did the fan, or use the fan brush to do the wave. So hopefully you're going to show that on the Facebook page, or upload it to Twitter, Instagram, to the two other Facebook pages I have up there. Okay, so let's do some of these dark stripes on here. Let's bring the painting back, or the lighter stripes. Now, one thing, because this is a dark background, you may even want to add a little bit of extra white into the paint, because as this dries, it's going to get darker again, and it might be a little bit harder to see some of these lines if they're after they've darkened, and then you don't want to have to paint them all over again, or so adding just an extra little bit of white might help. Now my hand seems to be a bit sticky and sweaty, so I am going to use a piece of paper here to do some of this. can see I'm not being too worried about being too careful about making really super pretty lines here. A bunch of this, especially where they meet up, there's gonna be some black lines that are gonna cover some of this. I still have the little peaks from the waves that are gonna come into play. Bit of a goofy wide line, a little bit wider than I wanted, but I guess it's kind of closer to us, so it kind of makes a bit of sense. But so you can see how these lines also really help give volume to the wave. It really feels like it's now curling over. It's all these little details that make this painting so gorgeous. Okay. Let me see. I think next what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint the boats, and then I'm going to go back with some white and paint in some of these peaks, and then we'll do black, and then we'll be done. So, although that sounds like that's just minutes away from being, we're still, I'd say at this point, maybe 2/3 done right now. Although doing the black outlines, should you choose to do them, might be the most time-consuming part of this project. You could certainly kind of keep it like this, if you like, and kind of keep it more painterly and less graphic. Okay. So these boats. Now, which color do we want to use to make the boats? It's going to move this painting out of the way while I mix some colors. To make the boats, I'm going to suggest we make a warm brown. So we made a cool brown for the sky and the background. We're going to use a warm brown for the boats. And that's going to help create a separation from the sky as well as push the boats a little bit further forward. So here's this mixture. Two warm colors, the warm yellow and warm red. That was maybe a little too much red. And a little bit of blue. Actually, you know what? That's not too far off. That was... I think maybe if we put a little bit of white in here. I thought we were way off the mark and need a lot more yellow, but that could work. I do think I am going to add a little bit extra warm yellow. Yeah, I think it just needed just that little bit more, personally. And there are 3 boats there, so you could paint the boats slightly differently. Maybe we'll do that. So just squeeze some of this paint off the brush. Okay. Might as well just clean these brushes up a little bit as we go. Cleaner rags here. That's why it's good to just have lots of rags around that you can just swap in and out, because sometimes after a little while, at least until the rag dries, it just sometimes just starts to become, it's making the brush dirtier than it is cleaning it. Okay, so just going to paint this whole thing, and then I can change things up as needed. So you can see the way that I'm painting these boats. They become a little bit more obvious. In the video that I was mentioning earlier, where we see another artist explaining his process, Hokusai's process, and actually trying to paint in the similar style, we see a different print, a much older print, or again, I don't know which one came first, but the one that we have up on the screen now, or the one that artist is showing, but that one, these boats virtually have no color at all. And you don't even notice that there's boats in this ocean until you look really carefully at it. Okay. And then just gonna get up in here. I have a feeling I'm not going to finish the other Hokusai painting. At least not tonight. So if anybody's sitting here waiting for me to work on that one, just as a heads up, that you don't have to sit there and wait, because it's basically this other version of the painting is going to be very similar to how I do this. So how useful it would be for me to actually go ahead and paint it at this point is debatable. But I think once you know how to now transfer a picture onto the canvas, you might find that particularly helpful for doing a whole host of other things. And Mod Podge has a whole kind of examples on their website of different ways you can use their materials. I'm just gonna come back and get. This just drives me crazy when I do this. Well, we'll see. Sometimes those little parts of a painting that drive you nuts just sort of disappear as you work on them. Okay. Anything else I want to do on right here? There is a lot of detail on these boats. I'm not going to do a lot of that detail. I think it's just maybe not the I mean, if you want, you can see, you can download the image from the Dropbox, or obviously this image is everywhere, so you can find it elsewhere as well. If you really want to dive into that. And the tracing I did, the outline, I do use a little bit more detail. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting the white in, and as I do the white, I'm going to start getting the peaks back in here. And that's going to allow me to start cleaning some of this up. So basically, at this point, I think all I'm going to really be using is white and black. I think those really, unless I wanted to do a little bit more, adding some kind of shadows or highlights on these boats, I think that might be okay. So let's get some white. I'm going to use white directly out of the tube. I'm just going to make sure my brush is nice and clean, and I'm going to start going over areas here. maybe I'm just going to blow dry the canvas too, just so I don't smudge any paint anywhere. So let's come back down here. So now I'm going to go in and using this white, it's like I'm cleaning up the painting a bit. Areas where I was a little bit sloppier. Now the white is slightly different than the gesso. So if you really, really want to be precise, what I would suggest is painting over everything that's white so that you don't have two slightly different whites. But for pretty much most people are not going to be able to notice any difference whatsoever. You know, possibly as time goes on, as the painting ages, picks up dust, those kind of things become a little bit more apparent, but okay. So I'm just adding some white over here to kind of block out. I want this wave to kind of continue off into the horizon there. So now I'm going to try to get some of these the waves. Let me see. Let's get a different view. So as I do this, I'm going to kind of come in. And let's say I'm going to put a wave here. Right, kind of come up. And then just sort of pull my hand away. Right, and come up. And even as I do it, I might spin my brush, because that's going to help get it a little bit sharper kind of a point. This little bit inside here, it's a little confusing because these colors look very similar, but once we start putting the black in, it's going to get a lot more distinction between those colors. So you can see I have a lot of paint on my brush. And I certainly do not want to use any water at this point. The water is going to thin this out and make, it's just going to, I'm going to have to do like 5 layers of white in order to see any of these, to kind of cover things up adequately. This brush is just too big. So I'm going to keep this one though for, it's handy to have like 2 brushes in your hand to paint the smaller one. There we go. there for a minute because I'm not going to use it for a little bit. So I'm just going over all of these little peaks here. So you don't have to do every single little one here, but I think you can see that now because these tentacles are, I think, are definitely the most iconic part of this painting. So capturing these is, I think, the key to making this painting look like the original, or at least capturing the spirit of it. And if you do this well enough, you may not even need to go back over and outline things with black. I'm still going to do that myself so you can see what it looks like, but so the more of these little things you can get on there, the better. And it's a bit of a time-consuming process, but I think it definitely will pay off, as you will see here shortly once we start outlining. I think we're about probably 5 minutes away from doing the outlining with the black, and that will bring us pretty close towards the end. Of course, you can keep on going deeper and deeper into detail. So it's just sort of like any of the paintings we've done so far. You know, it's just how much time and energy do you want to put into the painting, and when do you want to call it quits? You know, not everybody has unlimited amount of time to work on a painting like this. But, you know, also you don't have to finish the painting all in one go like some superhero. And you don't have to spend, be up all night long finishing it. You might want I'm sure there's a lot of you who, watch for half an hour and then okay, I'm going to come back and finish it tomorrow. And that's how I would say most artists create their work, is over a period of time rather than all at once. And that works just fine. So you can see as things dry, I kind of go back and add a little bit more water or paint over there just to kind of touch them up and just because the white is, as it dries, some of the darkness is going to come back through. And you can see there's some kind of what do you call this? The white caps, or is that that are kind of these tentacles? I always keep calling them tentacles because that's just the way that they appear to me, as like menacing fingers. Although this is the way that he painted a lot of water. He obviously, we didn't really go into too much of his other work, but he painted a lot of paintings and drawings, prints that feature water as a big part of the imagery. And not surprising, being Japanese and living on an island surrounded by water on every side, that he would be interested in describing the ocean. I find this like super peaceful. This is like part of my mental health program, is just doing this kind of very repetitive task over and over and over again. And it just feels really like this is the kind of thing I like so-called wasting my time doing. Just feels like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of brain activity going on. I can kind of zone out a little bit. Obviously I'm sitting here chatting away with you guys as I'm doing this, but when I'm doing this kind of thing on my own, I find this like, this is the kind of thing where it's very easy to lose track of time. You're just painting away, and then all of a sudden, like, whoa, it's 2 in the morning. I got to work in 4 hours or something. Like, how did this happen? It's the danger of getting into art, is that you just sort of get sucked into it. But of all the possible habits a person could have, painting, I think, is the healthiest of all. So these little areas where it's like, oh, it's very difficult to see the difference between some of the white and the blue. When we put this black on here shortly, all of a sudden, though, even if they're very similar, there'll be an instant sort of separation. So don't worry about it. The things are gonna change very quickly when we start going into the black. So you can use this white to go in and clean up anything that you felt was a little bit sloppy. Okay. Doesn't this feel satisfying when it starts to kind of come together? You start seeing the light at the end of this tunnel. I'm just making stuff up down here. This is stuff that wasn't in the original, right? Because it was cut off. Or not cut off, just the painting just didn't extend down to this point, so I've kind of artificially extended the painting down into this area. So you have total license when it comes to a part of the painting like this to do whatever should please you. You can see it's taken, this is now, I think, the third layer of paint I've put over in this area to touch that up. So it sometimes takes quite a few passes of paint to block out another color. almost done. The white anyway, and then the black comes in. And we can make some decisions when we start putting the black in as to how much black we're actually going to use. You don't have to paint everything black if you don't want to. I'm just gonna use the blow dryer to... I should have painted this area before I painted down here, but... Making sure things are nice and dry before I put my hand all over it. Okay, let's go back into here. One has to remember, this was painted at a time before photography, right? So it's not like you could take a photograph of a wave and then just to sit back and kind of try to examine that photograph and how water behaves, or right, to make a painting of water before photography allowed us to kind of freeze action. It was extremely difficult. I've spent hours and hours and hours sitting on the beach trying to draw waves, and boy oh boy, if you want an experience that makes you feel like that is discouraging, trying to draw waves would be perfect for you. Because you realize immediately, like, it's, you know, the second you see a wave, it's gone, right? It's not, maybe it's gone, but it's certainly changed and transformed. Its shape is different. So, I mean, you end up creating a style inevitably, even no matter how realistic you're trying to paint or draw those waves. Now obviously we can take a photograph of a wave and we can freeze time and work from a photograph, but so that certainly was not the case with Hokusai, right? And so when I keep referring to the white caps as being like tentacles and this menacing quality, that may or may not have been his intention. I mean, we see these people that appear to be moments away from meeting their fate underneath this giant wave, but maybe that wasn't his intent. Maybe it's not a depiction of people moments away from dying, but just sort of depicting kind of their regular day at work, and this was the kind of waves that were typical of, I don't know, I have no idea what he was going for here. interesting to know. Okay. Let's see. Tempted to do something in here, but maybe we'll see how that goes. I'm gonna put okay. It's going to come back into the sky. Pretty hard to see anything there. Just going to quickly go over any white areas need to be just brought back out because the other surrounding colors were too dark. I think this area okay. Oh, and Mount Fuji too. I want to make sure I touch this up here. Heard this camera seemed to be focusing, and I sort of get worried that the whole time it's been going in and out of focus. Okay, so now I'm going to clean these brushes off very quickly, and we're going to go move into the black here. I know that there's some spray of water that happens. You see those there's little white specks and dots. I'm going to do that after I get the black in here, and I'll show you a little technique for that. So our last little bit is we're going to put a little bit of black on the palette. I like to use a little bit of black at a time, right? You can see I just put a little blop down there because the black, I always find it seems to, maybe it's just me, but it seems to dry fast, and the faster it dries, the kind of bigger pain it is to work with. Okay. So I'm also just going to use a little bit of the slow dry medium or the retarder just to kind of help with the brushability of the paint a little bit while I'm doing this. Now, I just put, let me see, I'll show you how much I put in there. If you can see, I'm not going to use maybe necessarily all of this all at once. I'm just going to kind of brush and mix this in. So the slow dry medium is going to slow the paint from drying and should help give it a little bit more brushability so that it especially when I'm using a smaller brush, I'm trying to get these details that the paint is less likely to gum up and start kind of getting chunky, and when it does that, that's kind of very frustrating to paint with the paint when it does that, because it's just, you want kind of nice smooth. Other things you could put in, and maybe we can even try it and we'll just see the difference, is the paint pouring medium, because that's going to also have a very similar effect. It's going to stretch the paint. The only difference is that the paint pouring medium is going to still dry at the same rate as the regular paint, so it might work really, really well, but for a much shorter period of time. Okay. Jean says, thank you for another wonderful evening. It's 11 o'clock here in Nova Scotia. Wow, tea time and bedtime. You're going to have a cup of tea. No caffeine, right? No caffeine. Irene's, I'm off as well. Time for some supper. Deborah, wow, Michael, that's lovely. And Gail says, thank you, Michael. That was fun. See you all on Thursday. Great job, you guys. Well, I'm just going to keep on working here. I'll show you, if we look at the original, I'm going to go in and add the black outlines on a lot of this painting. It's going to take me probably a half hour to do that. You can be selective as to how much black you put in. If we just zoom into the painting, you can see there's a lot of little black peaks, but not everything is outlined. Not everything. Especially the difference between the different blues in the water and the white and the blue on here. And you see Mount Fuji, the different areas are not outlined. Right, and then of course, as you do this, you can decide to, I'm going to zoom into here too. Okay, looks like it's in reasonable focus. I'm going to paint this in. And I'm not going to, again, paint every single little aspect of this. So when I go into my palette here, I get some black on, and then I like to kind of spin it so that I can get a nice sharp point with my paintbrush. Okay. And it depends on how finicky you're planning on being with this, and how much detail you really want to put in. You will find it makes a huge difference though. Now, again, I'm going to remove some of these, the waves a little bit, just for the sake of time. Because there's a lot of little waves in here. The other thing too, you know, and I'm actually, like, I keep sharpening the waves, whereas you can see there's a little bit of a wobbly quality to the way that he does it, which I think is actually more effective, because waves aren't these kind of perfect, nice shapes. They often, you know, they're not geometric, and so feel free to go off and kind of, as you're doing it, you can even kind of shake your hand a little bit to try to get that look. And also these the waves don't always all connect, right? There's sometimes you can see they're a little bit open-ended. As you're doing this, sometimes you just have to be careful that you're, you know, just every once in a while check to see that your hand isn't covered with paint. So I think you'll find that this, all of a sudden, everything starts to really come together, and you can see that obviously his wave kind of continued a little bit further than mine, and I'm not sure how I missed that, but I'm not too concerned about those little areas that, you know, I haven't captured in my own painting. So this, what we're doing right now, this is really, I think, probably the most iconic part of the painting, and where I think you should consider, anyway, spending some time really kind of practicing to try to paint carefully outlines like this. Whether you want to use this kind of style or not, it's being able to kind of paint little details like this is really, really helpful. So just like the painting of the white I found very meditative, I also find this super relaxing. Probably tell, like, I get less chatty as I just start to kind of zone out and start kind of painting. You can hear our daughter running around upstairs there. Remember, all of this is done in woodcut. It'd be worth watching that video. I guess I mentioned it, but I should post a link to it in the video description. And just taking a look at how difficult wood cutting is from just a pure technical perspective. And then I think you'll think, it just blow your mind to think that this guy did all of this, you know, carved it out of wood and then inked it up and then painted from it. Okay, so I'm going to try to get the shape of this boat. So again, I'm not going to go into too deep with the texture of the boat, but just I get maybe some of the shape inside here. This is the inside of the. There we go. And unfortunately, some of the poor passengers, the fishermen on this boat, or be out of luck. They're not, or maybe I'm going to save them by not including them on here. I'm a little disappointed in the way that I've painted these. They don't quite have the same curling quality that his do, and it feels a little bit less like this. And my painting isn't nearly as menacing as his. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom back out. Alright, and I'll zoom back out of this. So I'm just going to keep on going here. I should be done in about 15 minutes. So it's up to you to decide how long you want to spend working on this kind of thing, but what's funny to me is like how just working on this, like I see more of my own style kind of coming through than even Hokusai's. Just inevitably, just the way that I paint, and I think that's partly just, you know, years and years of me painting. But I think there's also a little bit of biology, physiology. You know, the way that I hold my brush versus the way that he would have held his brush versus the way that you guys are holding your brushes is going to change kind of how you make these little waves. I feel like my waves look more like the frosted tips on somebody's hair or something, right? But that's okay. Always a bit of an adventure every time you break out the tools and you start working on a painting. I learn a lot about myself every time I'm working. So as you get into this part, it's up to you to decide how much black you're going to put in. I think I'm just going to put black on I might say the bottom side of some of these. Maybe not even all of them either. We'll just have to play it by ear a little bit here. We'll just see how it turns out. actually, yeah, I'm going to zoom in to this area of the painting. Oops, let's go the other way. So that's the next part, and let's... Sue's getting tired. You definitely, you guys are putting in some long hours here working on these paintings. Oops. Ah, come on. So doing all of this stuff, I found like the retarder or the slow dry medium has been very helpful for this. If I hadn't been using that to do these black lines, I think I would have been much more frustrated because this paint would have seized up and started to dry. And when the acrylic paint, when you're doing these fine details with acrylic paint and you've got your paint is drying, it is just like one of the most frustrating experiences. You know what, I'm going to just turn this into another boat. And again, these poor fellows have been omitted from the painting, so they will live to fish again. Shelley says, it's like a finished carpenter. There's a huge difference between a rough carpenter and a finished carpenter. Yeah. Definitely. Right? You know, like one person you get the walls up and it looks great, their job is done, and then somebody else comes in and cleans it all up and makes it look presentable. And again, part of me doing these classes is to show you a bunch of different techniques and to expose you to a bunch of different artists and to show you to help you kind of find the path that you feel works best for you and where your patience lies. Right? Like doing what we're doing right now, I'm sure that there's a few of you that are like, no way, man. After 20 minutes of this, I am out. I have no interest in this type of like slow, methodical detail. I loved painting the figure, or doing the splatter paintings. Like that was fun because I kind of could go a little bit wild. But this slow detail stuff is not for me, and that's totally fine, right? And I think it's what's most important is that you are able to have that realization is finding one method that kind of speaks to you and your temperament. So I have to find what happens if I've been painting for a while, what the paint starts to build up around the ferrule, and I just kind of take my cloth and just clean off that paint bit, and then I can continue. Having a bath upstairs there and having quite a lot of fun by the sounds of it. Okay, we'll get Mount Fuji done, and then we got a little bit of this here. It's got these little tiny areas, and I think this can also be really helpful. Get a little bit of these. What do I want to do here? These are these figures. I'm just going to kind of loosely outline them. Is it important that anybody knows what that is? Oops. Don't like that, but... And then Mount Fuji. Yeah, let's outline Mount a little bit tempted to just leave it as is in the background. Okay. So let's zoom back out. And kind of just think about briefly before, I think because we're almost done here, what do we want to do to finish it off? There is little bits of white, little dots of white that I wanted to do. Oops, I don't want to finish this area here. Oy, oy, oy. Okay, so I'm gonna clean this off. Let's add some little specks of white all over here. And I'm just gonna experiment on this previous canvas that we had here. Now, ideally what I would use is a old toothbrush. I usually have one around. Oh, you know what? It's by the sink here. Give me a second. I'm just gonna. Okay. Sorry about that. So... I just mixed in, I guess, I don't know if it was... I was just using the pouring medium. I'm not sure when it cut out there, but that's a bummer. So part of doing this is really trying, I find it really hard to create random spots. So my strategy for doing that kind of little randomness is to really try to be moving around as much as possible, so that I'm not doing like a little line of dots in one place. I may have gone a little bit overboard with these dots, but you know, I'm kind of having a bit of fun doing it, and at the end of the painting, I gotta be careful. I feel like I'm getting my wrist in a few places here, so I'm gonna try getting a few more splatters in this area here. Got a big blob on Mount Fuji itself, which may not be what I would have liked, but and there's a bunch up here. There are things I could have put some tape down to kind of hide a little bit of that. I'm getting paint everywhere. Which is, if you're doing this, you want to have like some paper down, obviously, to prevent paint from going all over the place. Okay, I think I'm going to call it a day there. Part of me really wants to scrape that paint off of Mount Fuji, but I'm afraid I'll just make matters a big headache for myself, so I just want to go in here, try to add a little bit more randomness. I feel like some of the dots I added there just seem too well placed, and okay. Let's just see these things side by side. Oh, I want to pick that paint off so bad. But since it's surrounded by everything else, that would just be a disaster. Okay. Just have to learn to live with it, which is, I think, one of the big learning experiences I always get out of painting, is learning to accept the painting as it is rather than what it could be. All right, okay. things get kind of jammed up in there. Anyway. So. There's another one there. So, doing that little bit of a splatter thing, I don't know if everyone is up for it. It takes a little bit of boldness, courage, and maybe a little bit of stupidity to do something like that, especially after you've been working on a painting for a few hours. Is that something everybody feels comfortable with doing? Absolutely not, for sure. For me, it's kind of just a little fun way to add something a little bit different to this painting, which so far, can feel a little bit dry when you're doing all of that little brushwork. But, some people, again, really get into that, and some people, it's just like, they want to run in the exact opposite direction. So, which kind of person are you? Which kind of, this is obviously a totally different painting than the Jean-Paul Riopelle painting we did last week, right? Although that splatter stuff is right out of the same playbook. Anyway, and Donna says, I think I would cheat and use a pen for the black outlines. That's totally acceptable too. So you could use a Sharpie, just keeping in mind a Sharpie is probably the least archival tool you could possibly use. So if you did use a Sharpie, it might look really great for a couple of years, but if it's anywhere near a window, you're going to find that Sharpie starts to go like purple and starts to fade over time. And it can look a little bit different over top of different colors. But it will certainly work. And when I teach in schools, often we'll use watercolor and then outline with a Sharpie. And for little kids, it's, it works perfectly fine. Any other kind of pen may not really work very well painting over top of acrylic paint. It might just, it's worth trying, but a ballpoint pen it probably wouldn't work very well. Anyway, let me see. Oh, Donna says I got acrylic paint pens. If you have those, they'll work probably very fine. In fact, you're going to be able to get a lot more consistent line rather than when you use a paintbrush. Outlining things with a paintbrush is very tricky. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you for joining me for another one of these episodes. And I'd be very interested to hear later on your experience and how this went, especially when you start doing the black lines. Was that something you found easy, difficult, never again, or can't wait to do more of it? It's up to you to decide, right? On our next class, later this week, we are going to be painting a painting by Anne Savage. Anne Savage, a great artist in her own right, who also had very good friends with Lauren Harris. We'll talk about their relationship there, because there's kind of it's an interesting story that Lauren Harris described her as the love of his life. But were those feelings reciprocated? We'll find out. So on Thursday, we are going to do a totally different painting than this. And we're going to examine one of Canada's great artists, Anne Savage. And it'll be an outdoor snowy scene. So maybe, depending on where you are, especially if you're somewhere in Canada, you might be digging your way out of snow. Or if you're here in Vancouver, walking around in rain boots and umbrella. Okay. So, I'll see you guys in a few days. Enjoy your time until then. And if you liked this, please like, subscribe. Feel free to make a donation in the PayPal link below. And we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Oh, that's not the one I want. I want this one. And there we go. Good night, everybody.